Hey, welcome back to the Stick
Figure story, guys. This is episode 33 of the American series. Today, we're going to be talking more about the Texan War for Independence.
There, that's better. I'm sure you get sick of hearing the same intro every time, so I thought I'd just speed it up a little. General Martin de Cos was hard at work in Goliad. Several of the Texas rebels had been rounded up and thrown into prison, and the city was currently under the firm hand of martial law, meaning military rule. So far so good. Santa Anna would be pleased. But the Texans weren't pleased. A band of men got together outside the city and decided that they must do whatever it took to stop Martin from bringing Texas back under Santa Anna's heel. Their plan was to launch a surprise attack on Goliad, kidnap Martin, and use him as leverage to get the rest of the Mexicans to bail out of Texas. And if the rumors going around were true, they would also cash in on the $50,000 that the general supposedly had with him. It was whilst this plan was being forged against him that Martin received news of the Battle of Gonzales, that Texan victory we talked about in the last episode. Well, it wasn't as if he had expected smooth sailing. He began to organize a march to Bexar. They left in short time and in good order, on October 5th, 1835. And what became of the plot to kidnap Martin? Well, turns out the band of Texans had no idea that Martin had even left. They were outside the city, you must remember, and they had been too busy getting ready to notice what he was doing. As far as they were concerned, everything was firmly in place for the attack to commence on October 10th. And commence it did, with great fury. The Texan militiamen poured into the city with guns ablaze and spirits high with daring. Martin had left a few troops behind in Goliad to keep things under control, and it was only this handful who stood to oppose the Texan onslaught. The battle was over in a mere 30 minutes, with a Texan victory, as you might suppose. The joy of victory was a bit dulled when they found out that Martin had left, and the rumored money with him. But no matter, Goliad was theirs. And what's more, they too for the first time heard of the Texan triumph at Gonzales, and the newly created Army of the People. They responded to the good news by sending a group of volunteers to go help Stephen attack Bexar. Then, they began planning a few little exploits of their own. With just their little force, they couldn't necessarily drive all the Mexicans out of Texas, but they might be able to starve them out. The plan was to get control of the key fort overlooking the ports on the Gulf of Mexico, Tepoztlan. This would stop the Mexicans from being able to get food, supplies, and extra men by sea. Of course, they could still get these things by land, but the journey was much more difficult and expensive that way than to go by ship. It wasn't long before Fort Tepoztlan fell. And I do mean fell. The place was taken even more easily than Goliad had been, and thereafter it was razed to the ground. It's important for me to tell you, though, that not all the men of Fort Tepoztlan were Mexicans. Many of the soldiers there were actually Texans. Texans that supported the centralism of Santa Anna. Thus, you see, not all the Texans agreed on what should be done about their government. It's often this way in wars. Things are not always as clear as one nation against another. Texans against Mexicans, Americans against British. Often in wars, countrymen end up fighting with each other, and the issue is a thing of selfish interests rather than noble patriotism or matters of race. Thus, we see in this case, Texans fighting against Texans in the field. Another example of the Civil War side of the Texan Revolution was shown in the aftermath of this battle for Fort Tepoztlán. Agustin Viesca, the old Mexican-appointed Federalist governor of Texas and Coahuila, arrived in Goliad. If you recall, we talked about him back in episode 30, when he defied Santa Anna's orders to break up the local government, and was arrested for it. Well, he had been rescued from his prison by a group of Texan militia, and had come to take up his post as governor again. Some of the Texans, those ones that wanted to return to the Constitution of 1824 and the old Federalist way, were ready to put Viesca back into office. But other Texans absolutely refused to recognize Viesca as their governor anymore. It wasn't that they necessarily disliked Viesca for his own sake. These Texans were the ones that wanted independence, and to recognize a Mexican-appointed governor would be to acknowledge that Mexico still had power over them, that Mexico could choose their leaders. There were hot words and even some bullets exchanged over the matter of the governor. But we'll leave that mess and turn our attention to what was afoot in Bexar. Martin reached the city first and set about its fortification. This was the largest and last standing Mexican stronghold in Texas. Thus, you see, it was as critical for Martin to keep it as it was for the Texans to take it. Walls were repaired, and extra cannons were mounted in strategic points to guard against attack. Some of the cannons found their home atop an old Spanish mission that had been converted into a fort. Yup, this was that same old mission of the cottonwood trees that we talked about back when we first started this series. The Alamo. Stephen halted his army of the people just a few miles east of Bexar, and sent a messenger writing to ask if Martin would negotiate with him. But Martin refused even to speak with Stephen. "I will not speak with the commander of an illegal force," he said coldly. For that is just how the Mexicans viewed the Texans. Illegal rebels. Pirates, even, for many of the men come to fight with the Texans were Americans, and Santa Anna thought that these Americans were attempting to steal Texas from them. And so, the laws were made to deal with these rebels accordingly, as pirates. It was a policy that was to bring much bloodshed as this war progressed. The messenger brought Martin's grim reply back to Stephen, who quickly sent for more volunteers to bulk up their force. He had been hoping to make terms with Martin, but it was clear now that the general would listen to nothing but either starvation or storm.